Hello, let's get started with chapter 1. And with chapter 1, we are going to introduce biology. And so every chapter will start off with these chapter objectives. These are things that you should be able to do when you get done with the chapter. We're going to go through, I break the lessons up into chunks, so you're not sitting there for an hour watching a video. And so for today, we are actually going to do, in this particular one, we're just going to talk about these objectives here. So we're going to identify and describe the process, the properties of life, describes the level of organization, understand the role of evolution. We're going to briefly talk about that because we're going to spend a whole unit on it. And then understand how life is classified. I'm not going to read this through every chapter because, again, I try to not waste your time and get to the nitty gritty of the material that you need to know. This class has a lot of vocabulary. I would make sure that you are fully prepared to understand what these words are. So for every chapter in every lab, you're going to have vocab that you're going to want to make sure that you know. So again, in this first segment, we're going to talk about themes and concepts of biology. And then in the next segment, we're going to break it down into the process of science. So we're going to focus on 1.1 here. Themes of biology. So the science of biology is the study of life. And then the question is that scientists have is, well, what do we define as living? What is non-living? What is biotic versus abiotic? Biotic meaning living, abiotic meaning not living. I'm not asking if something is currently alive or dead. I'm asking if ever this specimen was living or non-living. And so we have to have a set of parameters to define what is living. What do we consider living? So these are the parameters that we're going to use. That living organisms have these 7 properties of life. There's some kind of organization to them. They respond to a stimuli. They reproduce. They adapt. They grow and develop. They maintain homeostasis, and they consume food in order to make energy. So here's the first 3. So order. So we talk about things being organized, and we have a picture here with a little caterpillar. And that little caterpillar is very organized. All of its little bristles and cells and organs and organelles, even if you want to go smaller. And then responding to stimuli. If you click on that, I think they have a link in your digital textbook. This right here is a mimosa plant, and when you touch the leaves, they move, kind of like a Venus flytrap. So they respond to a stimuli. And then here we're seeing a cell going through cell division. And so we need to be able to reproduce. Adaptation. We'll talk about Darwin's finches as they've come from an ancestor and how the beaks have been modified over time based on their diet. So we will talk about that particular process. And then grow and develop. And so, of course, we have our little kitties here. And so we know that they are going to grow up into full-grown cats, and they will kind of change in proportion, which is why I really enjoy the next slide that I put in here. Because if you think about a newborn baby, if you think about that newborn baby and how big its head is compared to its body. So it's almost a third, okay? And then notice as time, we don't just grow bigger from birth. We don't just get bigger, but we actually develop, we change as we get bigger. And notice our head is only, so like there's a quarter right here. Then at 3 years, it's only 18%. And then the head's only 6% as an adult. And so it would be kind of goofy to see humans as a full adult with their head being, think about a quarter of your body size being your head. That's crazy. So we do not just grow, but we also change and develop over time. And then we have homeostasis. Homeostasis means to maintain balance. And so we have to be able to regulate our internal conditions. You need to regulate your body temperature, for example. All of us, most of us have been sick here lately, and you know what it's like to have a high fever. You feel terrible. And so your body is not maintaining proper homeostasis. You also need to make sure that you're hydrated. And again, if you're not, you feel terrible. So all of these things are very important with your body and able to regulating and maintaining those conditions. And then the last one here, 7, is energy processing. We're going to spend 2 chapters talking about that. One is cellular respiration and the other is photosynthesis. And that's basically being able to take in food and convert it to energy that your body can use in order to carry out all the processes that they need to do to maintain homeostasis, to grow and develop, to stay organized. All of those characteristics are very important and needed. We need that energy processing to do pretty much all those other characteristics of life. And we can see here we got the polar bear, and then when we have kind of like our infrared here, you can see that it's giving off heat. We know that certain animals are warm-blooded, right? We have a body temperature, and so we give off heat. And then we like to organize everything. So everything likes to be organized. We can organize horizontally and vertically. And so first we're going to do that vertical alignment. We're going to go from small to big. And so when we go from small to big, we talk about atoms, and then atoms, we can talk about molecules. Molecules are made up of atoms. Organelles are made up of molecules, and the molecules are made up of atoms. And then we go here, and we'll talk about all the different organelles in a different chapter. And then cells. And so cells right here, this is the start. This is the beginning of life. The cell is the basic unit of life. And then we go from there to tissues. Tissues are made up of cells. Organs and organs are made up of tissues. Organ systems are made up of organs. And then we have organisms. We have a population of organisms. That means you have more than one person. You can see all the people in this picture. And then we can talk about communities. And communities are going to talk about areas with different species. And of course, we're going to have humans. We've got dogs probably at this park. We have grass and trees and probably worms in the soil. So all of these different living organisms in this particular area make up the community. And then we have an ecosystem. An ecosystem is where we have the abiotic coming together with the biotic. So again, when we look at an ecosystem, we're looking at how the living interacts with the abiotic factors. Those abiotic factors mean the water, the amount of sunshine, the wind, the soil, the rocks. So all of those things, the rocks and minerals that make up that ecosystem, that specific location, and how all those living organisms, all those biotic organisms interact with those abiotic factors. And then when we take all the ecosystems on our planet and put it together, it's called the biosphere. Bio meaning life, sphere, ball, so ball of life. So it's all the living areas on our planet. So here's just another list of them. So we have atoms, molecules, organelles, cells, tissues, organ system, organism. You will need to be able to organize these on your test from small to big or big to small. So make sure you have these down. And then from organism, we go population, community, ecosystem, and then biosphere. So you should be able to define each of these terms and put them in order. And then, so that was our vertical alignment. Well, then we can go horizontally, and that's the diversity of life, how different life is on our planet. And the biggest questions that we had was, well, how is life so different? It's same. We could talk about its unity in that it has very similar characteristics. All life is made up of cells, and cells have organelles, and they have DNA, and a lot of the DNA is the same. And all of these interesting facts that we find that show how all the living organisms on our planet are related. But then how are they different? What made them different? Where did that diversity come from? And that's where we were trying to explain, we had one finch with this type of beak. How did we get 3 different types? And there are actually a lot more than 3, but 3 different types of species of finches on the same island system. And so how did that happen? And that process is called evolution. The biggest problem we had is that scientists all acknowledged that evolution occurs, but we just didn't have the process, the mechanism, the how. How does evolution occur until Darwin and Wallace? And we'll get to that at the end of the semester. And so this can lead to speciation. And the best definition I can give for species, because there's many definitions for species, is it's a group of organisms that interact and interbreed. When they interbreed, they have to be able to produce viable, that means they're living, and fertile offspring. Right? So they have to be viable and fertile offspring. So when we talk about the diversity of life, we then try to say, okay, let's categorize. Let's try to organize life into different categories. And we had a nice system for classification, but there were some flaws. And so we tried to simplify it a little bit. So we simplified it into, we can start with prokaryotic cells and eukaryotic cells. So prokaryotic cells are single cell organisms, and they don't have a nuclei, and they don't have membrane-bound organelles. And we'll explain what a membrane-bound organelle is in chapter 3. But basically, they don't have like the Golgi, they don't have a mitochondria, they don't have the smooth and rough ER. All right. Versus eukaryotes, they could be single cell or multicellular organisms, but they do have a nucleus. So we can see like the prokaryotic cells are basically bacteria. Everything else is eukaryotic. And so we classified them into 3 domains. So 3 groups. Of the 2, these 2 are bacterial cells. Except for we found out that the bacterial cells were so different, we had to put them in 2 different domains. We have the regular bacteria, which is what you are familiar with. That is the most common bacteria. So if you've had strep throat or an ear infection or bronchitis, that is what you had, was just from the domain bacteria. Archaea are bacterial cells that live in really extreme and weird environments, like salty environments. So we have our halophiles. Some are thermoacidophiles. They live in hot and acidic conditions. And so this group right here, they are really weird in their living quarters, you could say. They live in these just really weird extreme environments, which is really odd. When we found out, we started doing DNA sequencing for evolutionary relationships, notice that all the rest of the life are eukarya. And notice how here in this branch, we're actually more closely related to archaeans than we are bacteria, which was very astounding for scientists. They did not expect that at all. But we can see these evolutionary relationships. So these 2 groups here are all prokaryotic cells. They don't have a nucleus. They don't have membrane-bound organelles. Eukarya they all have a nucleus, and they have membrane-bound organelles. And we'll talk about those, like I said, in chapter 3. So here's our bacteria, our breakdown here, our bacteria, our archaea. If you've been to Yellowstone, you know, I mean, I probably got pictures that are even more spectacular than this because I was there last summer. All those really pretty colors we get from the archaeans. And so, like I said, these two groups are prokaryotic. And then we have our eukaryotic cell, which is where we call this domain eukarya. It's everything else, plants, animals, mushrooms, fungi. Trying to think of animals that you guys know, because if I talk about protists, you guys would not know most protists. Algae, okay. We used to divide life into what are called kingdoms, and maybe you guys learned this in high school. And so we actually, when I was in high school, this whole kingdom here was called Monera, Monera for one cell. So we only had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kingdoms. So we had Monera, Protista. Protista is the junk drawer of the kingdoms. Like if it doesn't fit in any of the other kingdoms, we threw it all in Protista. Plantae, of course, are plants, Animalia are animals, and then fungi, like mushrooms and stuff like that. And then we found out, remember, I talked about how bacteria and archaea are so different. So we split them into eubacteria and archaebacteria. Right now, they are in the process of unpacking kingdom Protista. And it is crazy how some of the stuff they're, actually putting in different kingdoms. But they have a whole new classification system for Protista, which is, it's kind of crazy. I think there are like 5 different, we call them clades. So this is something that they're still working out, because as they get more and more organisms DNA sequenced and comparing those sequences with those different organisms. So this is kind of like an overall picture of showing the side-by-side kingdom versus the domain. So bacteria is the same as eubacteria, archaea, archaebacteria, those are the same. You can interchange those for me. I really don't care whether you call the domain bacteria or eubacteria. And then we have eukarya, which we unpack in the kingdom system down into Protista, Plantae, fungi, and Animalia. All right. So again, that is our horizontal alignment. So we did our vertical, small to big or big to small, and then we talked about the diversity of life in our horizontal organization. And that is it for the first part of chapter 1. So I would make sure that you are reading the chapter. That is an important part of being successful in this class, and that you understand the notes and maybe take notes and outline, do your vocab and know all that and study for your test. You will have a quiz on each chapter, which this one will be due. Quizzes are due on Sunday. So you will have that due on Sunday for chapter 1. All right, I will see you in the next video.